So Miss Reverend Lady Burke, she's not a miss actually. There are three things I want to share, four things. One is she is an interfaith minister, and this marks the 20th year, correct? This marks the 20th year. So the world is a better place with Helen as a minister, because that's her heart ministers to people. It's what she does. The other thing, as a result of that, she moved into her, probably part of her soul's purpose, which was being a hospice chaplain. And she did that for many, many years and touched many, many souls, both those on the threshold and all the ones who loved those people. So I'm sure we'll hear a story or two from that time. And she also was part of a course in love, right? A circle for many, many years as well. So she's, what I love about Lady, I've known her for at least 25 years, at least, probably 30. And we first met during an exercise at Pebble Hill Church, where there were two concentric circles, one moving this direction, one moving that. And we were to greet each person we saw, I believe, silently. And when our eyes connected, it was like this soul recognition. So we've been friends all these years. And I want to tell you that this woman has such a loving light in her. I feel like she's a really bright light, and we're really blessed to have her. And I'm looking forward to what you have to share with us, Lady. Okay, thank you.
Hello, friends. Hello, friends in Zoom land. Because of the 20th anniversary, I took this out of my closet. I haven't worn this in many years, but I would wear it for weddings or funerals or different things I would officiate. But this is my stole. It has the symbol of the rose, which is my personal kind of power symbol. And then it has a lot of different faith traditions here. So I'm so glad I was inspired to bring it today. It feels wonderful. It feels wonderful to wear it. So I'd like to talk today about forgiveness and a return to innocence. The song that we listened to in the beginning was written by Donna Marie Carey. And those of you who studied A Course in Miracles for any length of time may have heard her perform or heard, but she wrote all of her music directly from The Course in Miracles. So that's one of the reasons I chose it. But also, I love the way that the refrain repeats, because we need to be continually reminded of our innocence and the innocence of each other. So this last year I wrote, well, the last 2.5 years I spent writing a book of my memories of not only my opportunities for personal growth, what I call threshold moments, but those of people that I had the opportunity to serve or support through hospice care. This one story that I'd like to read to you today, it's about the power of forgiveness. And the theme that I pull from it is the work is always ours. The work is always ours, which I have to credit David Michael, a Course in Miracles teacher that some of us know, who always said, rule number one, what, Connie?
It's always about me.
It's always me. It's always me. Whatever's wrong out there, it's always mine. It's always mine to address. So the work is always here. So that's certainly true of forgiveness, right? One last thing I'll say is that this particular story is probably the hardest in the book. This is the book that I wrote, and it is available back there later. But this particular story is the hardest on the heart. But I really felt that this community would really be able to hold it and take the goodness from it. So bear with me. I usually enjoyed joining other team members for my initial pastoral care evaluation with the patient or their family. Accompanying the nurse or the social worker not only gave me a welcome opportunity to meet the patients and families soon after admission, but I enjoyed the synergy we shared. We had a wonderfully intuitive team. Much of our communication was unspoken. The work had called us each to it. What I found especially helpful about joint initial visits was giving the patients and families an opportunity to meet me before deciding if they would like to have the chaplain be part of their care team. It was a workaround from the alternative initial cold call, which often resulted in people declining pastoral care services. Preconceived notions as to what a chaplain might or might not provide were frequent barriers to access, as you can imagine. Some assume that they will be talked to or prayed at. The hospice chaplain's role is to provide spiritual and emotional support to patients and their families. This might involve making connections to clients, to their preferred clergy or spiritual caregivers, and it certainly can involve prayer. But most often, it involves counseling,
I'm sorry, we can't hear you. I think you circle ended up on mute, actually, on the, I think it's on the Zoom. No, we see. There we go. I think that's
how does
okay.
it sound now?
Sounds good. Thank you.
There's a story in here called, "Can you hear me now?"
Yeah, that's
it. To read that one, I don't know. That's another time. So I was with the social worker, Sharon, and we had driven quite a ways north of the city to arrive at a home that had beautiful landscaping, 2 bicycles laying on the lawn that were indicative of the 2 preteen age boys in the family. My stomach sank as I thought of how difficult this journey would be for them. Our new patient, Kevin, their father, had been living with ALS for quite some time, and we were called to help him and his family in his final weeks of life. I hear ALS and I go. Despite a polite welcome from the patient's wife, Leslie, I immediately sensed that her warm demeanor was a veneer. This was nothing unusual. Caring for a husband with this particularly dreadful disease, while raising 2 boys, she was likely to be feeling any and all manner of emotions, and was most certainly exhausted. We are privileged, so privileged. I didn't expect that. We are so privileged to walk into any home at such a sacred time, to meet people exactly where they are on this most difficult of journeys. Sharon began explaining the services we would be providing, and I focused on turning into Leslie, to her body language and affect, as well as to the home environment. She pointed from the living room across the foyer to a large room closed off with double doors. "He's in there," she said in a tone that sounded close to disdain. "You can see him when we're finished." Something was not okay. There was more in the air than the sadness of a dying family member. There was anger, a lot of it. Short answers and forced smiles gave Leslie away in short order. Her boys came hurriedly down the stairs, checking in with them. checking in with their mom on their way out to sports practice. But I noticed they did not stop to see their dad. Sharon took the lead when we met the patient, who no longer able to speak, was able to convey much through his facial expressions. He also had a computer-assisted device, which enabled him to type by blowing through a straw. Knowing it would take additional effort on his part, Sharon kept her assessment for pain, comfort, and safety brief. And having met that objective, went back to speak to his wife about the signing consent forms and about the schedule. So my initial visit with Kevin, or the professor, as I would call him, after our time together, felt like a solid start to what would eventually be one of my most meaningful patient-chaplain relationships. I started by telling him what I thought I understood from the hospice referral and from his wife regarding his health history, the family situation, his career, etc. His signals were clear as he clarified his agreement or disagreement with my comments one by one. Bright, opened eyes meant yes. Closed eyes, no. Squinty eyes, not exactly. I held off asking Kevin directly about his religious affiliation or spiritual beliefs. I was in the blessed business of mining meaning. Wherever the patient found meaning, that is where I would focus. That is where we would journey together. Along the way, his beliefs would become apparent. In the first visit, I learned that inquiring about the boys got bright eyes. And his work life and friends got the same. When I asked about the home environment, Kevin squinted. I acknowledged this must be really hard for all of you. I then asked how things were between him and Leslie, his wife. He closed his eyes and kept them closed. When he opened them, there were tears. I took his hand and nodded my understanding. It happens all the time like this when we've both been through so much, I said. He held my hand tighter and allowed his tears to fall. It was quite a while before they stopped. It was an even longer while before I spoke. Grabbing a tissue, I blotted his face and then supported his posture as he attempted to clear his throat. I sat down and again held his hand, allowing the silence that his vulnerability and sorrow deserved. I myself also needed some time. Kevin was not able to do anything at all for himself, not even wipe a tear. He was barely able to communicate, and he was deeply estranged from his wife on whom he was 100% dependent. I knew that I was entering into the unknown. No placating God loves you or anything else I had in my backpack of interventions would answer this call and join him in his pain and walk with him. My hand continuing to hold his had to be enough for today. As I heard the two women approaching beyond the closed doors, I said, I would like to come back to see you very soon, if that's okay. Maybe tomorrow, the next day. He opened his eyes wide. I'll speak to Leslie and see what day works best. Leslie did not come into the room, but Sharon came to the bedside to say goodbye. I left Kevin's room to ask Leslie's permission to return in a day or two. She seemed surprised, but conceded. As Sharon and I were taking our leave, one of the boys came in. He gave his mom a quick hug and went to the kitchen. Again, I noticed no stopping to feed Dad. My heart hurt. On the way home, Sharon suggested that our best strategy would be to continue providing one-on-one support. She to Leslie and me to Kevin. We also had a bereavement counselor who would support the boys, and of course the nursing staff. When I arrived for my next visit, Kevin was sitting up, strapped to his wheelchair in front of his keyboard. He noticed that he nodded to the screen, which displayed Put the straw in my mouth and I will be able to type. Clearly, he was ready to make the best use of our time together. We fell into a rhythm of communicating. He was able to direct the conversation by typing a specific word or phrase, a name, an issue, an emotion. From there, I would ask questions. He then would use eye movements, his wide eyes, his closed eyes, and facial expressions to confirm or clarify so that I would understand. It was soon evident that Kevin's emotional and spiritual well-being were as compromised as his body. He got to the point. He had not been the best husband or father. He had worked too much, traveled a good deal for business, and was never really planted at home long enough to grow strong roots in his primary relationships. Leslie was the rock of the family, managing everything at home, engaging with extended family, overseeing school, scouting, community, pretty much everything on her own. What made matters worse was that just before Kevin was diagnosed, they were planning to get a divorce because it had come to light that Kevin was also having an affair. Although he had done well to provide for the family financially, he had invested most of his attention outside of the home. Delving into the question of what was now most important to him was key, and how we would proceed. Having had almost 9 months of steady decline under his wife's competent but cold care, Kevin had given his life a thorough examination. By the time he and I met, his sense of meaning and purpose was all that mattered. He was full of guilt and shame and wanted nothing more than to convey his true remorse to his wife and to earn her forgiveness. This, he said, would be where he would find the only meaning his last days could possibly offer. Sadly, the timing was way off. Leslie had been defeated even before taking on the momentous responsibility of physically caring for her husband. She was now permanently saddled with nursing a man who had abandoned and betrayed her. And she was furious. She had also withdrawn any effort to foster the boys' meager relationship with their father. I suggested to Kevin that he write a letter to Leslie, a note on the computer, and to put it out there as honestly as he could. I encouraged him to use the big words and get right to the point. You don't have a lot of energy to type. Tell her what you just told me, how wrong you were. Acknowledge that you were not there for her and the boys, and that she had to do it all. Tell her you're sorry, heartbroken, whatever feels true. Ask her forgiveness. Less than a week later, at a team meeting, Kevin's nurse, Janet, warned the team that the patient was showing signs of rapid decline, encouraged us to surround the family with as much support as we could. Alex, the bereavement counselor who had particular expertise with children, scheduled visits with the boys, and I came to see Kevin several more times over the next couple of weeks. On my next visit, Kevin was again in the wheelchair in front of the computer. He was flushed when I entered, with a look of panic on his face, and I wondered if he were medically unstable. But he nodded me over toward him, and with his eyes pointed me to look at the screen. He had written a beautiful letter to Leslie, quite an extensive one, given the energy I knew it must have taken. I told he looked at it as if to invite me to read it, which I did. I told him I thought it was a beautiful letter and that it came across very heartfelt. He immediately started to tear up. I asked what Leslie's response had been. Did she read it? He closed his eyes in a no, and then typed, refused. We had talked about Kevin's religious beliefs, which included a God that many of us grew up to view as all-powerful and loving, but somewhat distant, if not hard to please. He was literally paralyzed by fears that if his wife did not forgive him, then surely God would not either. Whew. Funny, it's in my body, you know?
Yeah.
We already had an easy rapport. So in trying to relieve some of this incomprehensible heaviness of the situation, and I think inspired by angels, to be honest, I suggested to Kevin that we might pursue an accelerated forgiveness program. Sensing some interest in his eyes, I explained that a less than advanced program would go something like this. His wife would forgive him, then maybe he could forgive himself, and hopefully God would forgive him too. Given that his apology was not received and that time was very, very limited, this option did not seem ideal. I warned that an accelerated PhD program in forgiveness, which is what we called it, would be much more difficult. Additionally, it might challenge his current concepts of God. I waited several moments as he considered the invitation before looking up at me wide-eyed. I nodded in confirmation of his agreement and went on to outline the silver. Okay, number one, accept that God is love and knows nothing of unforgiveness. Number two, accept that Leslie's forgiveness is her work, not yours. Number three, if you want to die in peace, you might want to forgive Leslie and forgive yourself. Number four, if you want to die in peace, you could trust that God's love for you and Leslie and the boys is perfect, unconditional, infinite, and knows no bounds. Exploring these concepts, I asked which he felt most challenged by, and as expected, he chose number three. If you want to die in peace, you might want to forgive Leslie and forgive yourself. He looked up at me as if to say, how can I ever forgive myself? We had only 2 more visits before Kevin died. It was very apparent that he was extremely motivated to master this rapid curriculum. On our first visit, I asked him to reflect on all he had considered since his diagnosis and the change of heart that had accompanied his physical decline. I invited him to see that these realizations about how he had hurt his wife and family as grace from God, preparing him for that change of heart. We explored times when he had forgiven others. We discussed that true forgiveness involves seeing past the offense of another to their humanity, to their goodness, to their beauty, to their innocence. And if he could observe these traits in others, could he consider finding those parts in himself despite his mistake? The monumental effort it took for him to work emotionally and spiritually at this level, given his current physical condition, was at once inspiring and heartbreaking. I prayed and pushed hard with everything he prayed and pushed hard with everything he had to find his own humanity and goodness. I trusted that he was being supported in mighty, unseen ways. On my next visit, we focused on forgiveness as love received. Having forgiven himself and his wife, could he more easily open his heart to receiving the fullness of God's perfect love for him? On the day of Kevin's death, the whole team was present. Sharon sat with Leslie in the living room with a few other family members holding vigil, while Sue, our hospice aide, attended to Kevin's personal care. The boys were off at a friend's house, having said their tearful goodbyes with the support of Alex, the bereavement counselor. The nurse was on standby for that call from Sharon. When I arrived, Kevin appeared extremely weak. He was resting comfortably despite the shallowness of his breath. I sat by his side for a while, and when he opened his eyes, I took his hand. I asked him if he felt he had completed his coursework, and he opened his eyes just a wee bit further. From the family dynamic in the home and from my conversations with Sharon, there was no evidence that there had been any reconciliation. Still, there definitely was a wonderful piece about him that I had not seen before. I congratulated him on completing his PhD and gently squeezed his hand. I told him, I'm going to think of you as the professor. I'm picturing you in your graduation gown, fancy hood, and funny hat. And I'm hoping you'll be there wearing them, there to meet me when it's my time to go home.